the truth of the matter is more and more people are choosing to embrace a sober or sober curious lifestyle, and it's being met with resistance. So today we have a really fabulous guest. Her name is Hadley Sorensen, and she is someone who is here to talk with us about the dirty truth on social drinking. Hadley, thank you so much for joining us.
Oh, thank you for having me. I'm thrilled to be here.
And, I find it interesting that alcohol is one of those things where nobody thinks twice about consumption on a social level. It appears in so many different things, but if you're someone who doesn't drink, all of a sudden it really creates this abrupt stop in the flow. And so I think, unfortunately, it can lead to challenges for some people who can become addicted, or simply become a challenge for someone who's drinking more than they'd like because there seems to be an awful lot of pressure to drink.
Yeah.
Can you talk about that?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm someone who I describe myself as I was an enthusiastic social drinker. My drinking for my whole life followed kind of what we think of as normal social conventions. Now, I think believe firmly that we need to re-question what normal really looks like when it comes to drinking, but my drinking was not out of line with anyone
Mhm.
around me, right? I did it mainly socially, but I always felt like something about my relationship with alcohol was really off. I didn't
Mm.
like it. It made me feel sort of icky. I had a lot of shame and guilt tied to drinking, even though I didn't drink every day. I didn't necessarily drink every week. It's just something about it wasn't quite right. And I finally, at the age of 41, woke up with my last hangover. I decided I was sick and tired of feeling sick and tired, and that was going to be it. And I was somebody who, like you mentioned, dry January, people kind of resetting the first month of the new year. I did a lot of dry Januaries over the years. I took a lot of breaks from drinking, but I always went back and kind of ended up right in the same pattern. But it was
Mm.
interesting because when I did quit for good at 41, I knew I was done. But it was also the social aspect of it was interesting because I was the wine loving kind of party girl. It was very tied to I thought it was very tied to who I was. That was a big part of my identity. And so I was very nervous about what it would look like to give that up. And it definitely took some work to sort of figure out who I was
Mm.
without alcohol. And we can meet a lot of resistance, like you mentioned, from people who don't understand why somebody would just choose to give up drinking. And they assume that it means you must have had some problem. You must have been a raging alcoholic, right? We see it
Right.
in as black and white, and it's really not. It's not that either you're an alcoholic or you're normal. Now we understand that there's a lot of kind of gray area in between. So I think that people are starting to catch on. I haven't met nearly as much resistance as I thought I would.
Mhm.
My friends have been supportive. I still have a robust and healthy social life that I love. But it took a little internal work to navigate that and figure out what it was going to look like.
Yeah. And I think there's a little bit of a misunderstanding for so many people when it comes to, like you said, understanding why someone would stop drinking. I was definitely a very light social drinker, but at a certain point in my aging journey, I got to a point where alcohol just didn't agree with me anymore. It wasn't worth drinking because I felt so awful afterwards. Like one drink and I felt,
Yeah.
disgusting. And like I didn't even get the buzz. So I was like, what is the point? Like this is so fun. And I was astonished at like this whole mommy wine culture is also a nano wine culture where, oh, let's get together and we'll have a little wine while we're getting together or whatever. And oh, you don't drink. Like that's so can you talk about how that sort of wine, because wine, I think, is seen as such a low level of alcohol. It's not hard liquor, you're not pounding them back. And so it becomes this beverage that is really sort of seen almost like I don't even know how I'm trying to
It's
describe it.
glamorized and
Yes,
celebrated, right? It's
exactly,
so classy.
exactly.
We're drinking wine. It can't be a problem, right?
Right. And so it's how is that actually causing a problem?
Yeah, so there's a lot to unpack there. I will say, like you mentioned with your experience, so many women, whether they have sort of a tumultuous relationship with alcohol over the past or not, so many women are approaching middle age and starting to say, "Ugh, this doesn't feel so hot," right? You know,
Mhm.
we now know that alcohol messes with our hormones, it messes with our sleep, it messes with our gut, it messes with every bodily system that we've got, right? Um, which now everything we know about perimenopause and menopause, like we really don't need to add something else to the mix that's going to make it harder. So I think it's becoming more common for women to hit a certain age and say, you know what, this just isn't worth it anymore. And so that's a lot, my message has been that you don't need to hit any kind of stereotypical rock
Mm,
bottom
yeah.
in
Yeah.
order to quit drinking. You don't have to label yourself. You don't have to, you don't have to call yourself an alcoholic just because you quit. I mean, people have all of these rules that they think have to be followed for somebody who quits drinking. And all of that is just kind of outdated, antiquated guidance,
Hmm.
right? You can quit drinking anytime for any reason. The other thing that you mentioned that I think is so important to talk about is this idea of mommy wine culture, which is also, I heard you mention nana wine culture. It's kind of bleeding over. And it's this idea that like the mommy wine culture, and I had fully admit I was like a poster child for mommy wine culture back in my drinking heyday is this idea that, being a mom is really hard and we're stressed and moms bear the brunt of the emotional burden of child rearing, all this. We need something to make it easier. Here's wine. Wine will take the edge off. Wine will make it easier. We see it in the shirts that say, um, you know, rosé all day and the
Coffee, wine, repeat. Yeah.
yes, mommy's sippy cup, right? And it's the wine glass and I mean, I had tons of it that I threw out once I kind of opened my eyes to the toxicity of it all. Um, but it's really not doing anyone any favors. It's bad for
Hmm.
moms because drinking wine is not really self-care. It's not helping us. It's kind of making things worse, even if we don't realize it. It's not, it's chipping away at our mental health. It's chipping away at our physical health, and it's setting a really strange example for our kids. That
Hmm.
was one of the big eye openers with me as my boys were getting older and I was starting to figure all of this out. It was like, is that what I want to show my boys? That every time something feels hard or I'm frazzled or I'm exhausted or I'm stressed or any range of human emotions, right? Wine is the answer. And I've got a
Hmm.
t-shirt to go along with it. It's really kind of disturbing. So that's something that I've been really vocal about, trying to help educate people on. Wine is not self-care for moms. We need real self-care. We need real support. We need a lot of things, but
Hmm.
wine is really shouldn't be anywhere on that list.
Absolutely. And I also want to sort of take a little bit of a vertical step here or lateral step and point out that we're not by any means suggesting totality for everybody.
No.
Like
Mm-mm.
it's just if it's not agreeing with you or if it doesn't work for you, it is okay to go against the mainstream and say, you know what, I'm just going to choose not to drink. And
Yes.
but it's the thing that makes it challenging is that for whatever reason, our culture heavily promotes drinking.
Yes.
And so you wind up feeling, as you mentioned, a lot of shame, a lot of self guilt or blame around the desire to go against the mainstream.
Yeah, and what I talk about a lot in my book too is I have zero judgment for
Mhm.
moms who drink wine, right? I'm
Yeah,
not advocating like the return of prohibition or anything like
right.
that. But you can be a moderate drinker without perpetuating the mommy wine narrative. You can have
Hmm.
a glass of wine in the evening and if that works for you and you feel great about it, fine. But you can do that without sharing toxic mommy wine memes on Instagram and wearing the rose all day shirt in front of your kids.
Yeah.
So it doesn't have to be all or nothing.
And I think I would also like to propose that we start being kinder to those people who choose not to drink. As you
Yes.
mentioned earlier, just because you choose not to drink doesn't mean that you're a raging alcoholic. It simply means you choose not to drink. And there are actually some physiological reasons. And for some people, it's because they're simply looking to make a shift. They're focusing on different things in their life. And then for some people, there may be other reasons tied to it. But to go, oh, okay, I have seltzer, I have, like there are other options.
Right. Instead of, I hate going into a social setting. And of course, I'm much more confident in all of this now that I'm 3.5 years down the road into my sobriety journey. But early on, it would be, I'm going to this event tonight. Here's what I think, planning for what questions I was going to be asked and how I was going to explain it. And it all sort of depended on what mood I was in, how snarky I was feeling, uh, uh, but yeah, so if somebody says they don't drink, say, that's awesome. Would you like a LaCroix? And let's move on, right? Instead
Yeah,
of saying, oh, did you have a problem? Or why not? Or you can just have one, or why don't you just drink in moderation? All of these kind of
yeah,
strange remarks we tend to get from people who, it often those remarks say more about them than they say about us.
yeah,
But it can be tricky to navigate if you're in the process of trying to change your drinking.
sure. So I'm curious to know, I'm seeing lately a lot of non-alcoholic concoctions, what
Yes.
like mocktails or even beverages that they sell now that are made from botanicals or the return of the shrub, flavored vinegars. How do you feel about that?
So there's a lot of opinions about the non-alcoholic drink space. I think it is fabulous because it reflects this shift. More and more people are sober curious, are making the younger generations I hear are really shifting more towards this. They're not drinking as much as they used to, but we still want options. There are non-alcoholic wines that are phenomenal, non-alcoholic beers. There are almost like liquor alternatives and everything in between. The choices are just, there's almost too many to even try. And I
Mm,
think it's a personal decision. You have to do what works for you.
mhm,
I didn't even try any non-alcoholic wines for like the first 2 years after I quit drinking because I felt like it might be sort of triggering for me. I didn't
mm,
want something that kind of tasted like the real thing. But 2 years in, a company asked if they could send me some to try, and I said, sure. And I gave it a shot, and I was like, wow, this is really, really good. And I don't worry about it triggering me anymore. It's just nice to have it. I took a bottle to Thanksgiving with the family, and so I think it's a personal choice that you have to make. Um,
sure.
if it works for you and it keeps you from drinking the real thing, great. If you just like having options, great. But if you feel like it's a little too close for comfort, then
Mm.
just stay away from it. But the fact that we have so many choices is exciting.
Absolutely. And, for me, so many of those choices are incredibly flavorful, which
Yes.
really increases, I love kombucha spritzers, for
I
example.
love kombucha. That's my
Oh,
favorite.
kombucha is amazing stuff, and it's so good for you also. And then like I said, getting back into shrubs where they have, like this blackberry vinegar and you mix it with a little seltzer and it's wonderful.
Yes.
So having those kinds of things is a really nice option. And I also like that even people who drink alcohol sometimes are like, hey, what do you have that's not alcohol? And now there's this wide range of things that you can have without, anybody feeling left out.
Right. And I think it is encouraging some drinkers to kind of pace themselves a little. For example, I
Mhm.
brought a bottle of this non-alcoholic like champagne to Thanksgiving, and everybody was like, "Is that good? Can I try it?" And so some of my cousins who would normally be drinking a lot ended up having my non-alcoholic champagne because it was that good, and they were like, "Well, I'll just have this," and everyone enjoyed it. So I think it's a
That's
win.
really great. So you mentioned that you have a book. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, absolutely. When I first quit drinking, I've always been a writer, and so I was kind of journaling my process, like what I was going through as I kind of rediscovered who I was on the other side of drinking. And I started sharing little bits on social media, and so many people, my message was, you don't have to hit rock bottom. Anyone can quit. I talked a lot about being a gray area drinker, sort of that space in between. And so many people kept coming out of the woodwork and saying, me too. Oh my gosh, I really relate to your story. And there's so many great quitlet books out there, books, drinking stories about people. Changing their relationship with alcohol, but most of them were kind of rock bottom stories. And I loved them. They helped me a lot, but I thought maybe I could be the person to tell the story from a different angle that might help a different group of people. And so I just sort of plowed forward and decided I was going to make the book happen. And it was an amazing experience. So you mentioned the title earlier. It's The Dirty Truth on Social Drinking, Everything in Moderation and Other BS.
Yeah, that's really fabulous. Well, I'll make sure to put a link to that below.
Thank you.
And thank you so much for being here
Of
and for
course.
sharing your experience and your viewpoint. For anybody who's watching, obviously, as Hadley says, you don't have to hit rock bottom. You don't even have to want to give up alcohol. Like we can all benefit from being more open to those people who are, for one reason or another, simply
Yeah,
choosing not to drink. Yeah. So thank you very much for being here.
of
And
course.
for everyone who is watching, thank you for watching, for listening. And please remember, as always, in all you do, to make today a healthy day. Bye, folks.